this afternoon's session. First we have Andrew Chukyan, who's the Director of Corporate Affairs at Wimpelcom, a Dutch telecoms company. Actually, the Netherlands last year was Kazakhstan's #1 foreign investor, which is a fact. I'm not sure whether Wimpelcom is 100% responsible for that. We also have Josie Starok, who's the chair of the supervisory board at Pole Pharma. Do we have Josie in the room? If you'd like to come up on stage. So one of Eastern Europe's largest pharma companies, made big investments in Kazakhstan. And we're also pleased to be joined by Thomas Telmer, who's the Director for Europe and Central Asia at the International Finance Corporation, the financial arm of the World Bank. So first, Andrew, if we can start with you. So your company has a big digital business in Kazakhstan. You're in the telecom sector, and we know that the telecom sector is really critical for transformation and growth in economies, not just for its own right, but because all the other sectors need a strong telecommunications base in order to grow. Technology is changing very quickly, though. What sort of new digital technologies do you think are most important for the private sector to have access to in Kazakhstan, and what are your plans to expand them?
No, thank you, Simon, for your kind introduction. Thank you to Astana for hosting this excellent event. Coming from telecom sector, I could probably be the only speaker on this panel, or maybe the only speaker at this conference, who would not mind you guys paying attention to your phones more than you pay attention to the panel. So if you start glazing on your bright screens, that's okay. And if you find my remarks boring, that's a deliberate effort. We need you to drive our data revenue, and our Beeline network is the most reliable in Kazakhstan, and I hope you're roaming and tweeting and using social media as we go along. But maybe on a more serious note, the panel, as I was preparing for it, I think the title speaks for itself. It's about success stories on the road ahead. And when we think of our operations in Kazakhstan, about our investment, Wimpelcom Group's investment, it is a true success story for us. Today, we're a global enterprise. We're a global multinational based in the Netherlands, operating on 3 continents and serving 220 million customers. And we see ourselves as a multinational corporation, but that was not necessarily the case a short decade ago. When we entered Kazakhstan, it was just a beginning of our international story. It was the first international step Wimpelcom Group has taken. And it has been, as I mentioned, a major achievement. We've invested over $640 million over time into infrastructure. We're serving 10 million customers, and we're very proud of what we've been able to achieve in this country. And for us, the future is all about digital. And as Simon already mentioned, the way we're discussing in our HQ and the way we're thinking about our business is becoming a digital services provider. Remaining a telecom company, be it Wimpelcom or any other one, is not necessarily a sustainable strategy for the future. So moving into digital services is really where we headed. If I were speaking in Silicon Valley and Simon asked me about the road ahead, I would say it is about digital connectivity. But here we're speaking in Astana, we're not in San Francisco, and if you ask me about the road ahead for Kazakhstan, I'd say it's about digital connectivity. I'd say it anywhere. Digital connectivity is the way to democratize innovation. It's the way to address the topic of this conference, economic diversification. And we provide that platform. And maybe I'll stop here.
Yeah. Can I perhaps ask you why, you said Kazakhstan was one of your first sort of foreign investments as a company. Why did you choose Kazakhstan? Was it the right opportunity came along, or it was a deliberate strategy?
I think it was a bit of both. We were pioneers in the Russian market. We've developed our own network. We had the expertise, and we looked outside, looking at the right investment climate, right opportunity, right market size, kind of a receptive environment. And when we looked around our home market, Kazakhstan was our #1 choice. And I guess that speaks for itself.
And what maybe are some of the lessons that you've had from your experience investing here? So it's obviously been a big success for you.
Yeah.
Do you have any advice you would give to others, or is there anything you can think of that you think explains why things went so well for your company?
I think it's not necessarily an advice on Kazakhstan specifically. Every company, when it enters a new market, you need to learn the distinctive features of it. We're globally, kind of globally minded, but locally run. So we need to find that right balance. You know, in Kazakhstan, and maybe in my future comments, what I wanted to focus on is kind of domestic content development. Every market has its own specificity, and if you are simply thinking that you can bring a product, use the same template, and just run it everywhere, that may or may not work. And to be frank, in Kazakhstan, our company is locally operated. HQ has both an oversight advisory role, but being embedded in the market, having locally hired staff, all of that matters. It needs to be a right mix of global and local content.
Right, okay. Jerzy's, moving on to your experience. So you're from Polpharma, one of sort of the Central and Eastern Europe's most successful pharmaceutical companies, and you've invested in manufacturing in Kazakhstan. So you, in fact, are the poster child for the Prime Minister's diversification strategy, manufacturing in a non-resources sector. So Kazakhstan would really love to attract more companies like yours. What was it about the environment here that you have found most useful to your business, and is there anything that you see as a challenge for the future?
Well, Poland, during the central planning economy, means in the different systems, traditionally was exporting the pharmaceuticals to ex-CIS countries. That's why already the brands have been established and relations have been established, and Poland, Czechia, Slovak, Hungarian, and ex-Yugoslavia countries somehow have been a producer of generics, which was sold to this region. That's why a natural tradition in the different time, of course, that we bought the company in Moscow to add it to our export and having critical mass to produce efficiently, because it's all about the critical mass. You can say if today you have no business 250, 300 million in France in generic, you will never get any profit. Right. But to get this is extremely difficult, because the patent expire year by year, and if you come later, then you don't have a market share. That's why it's some good news is that pharma overall is quite expensive if you want to as a value. And second, that's why in second option is, of course, you look what is the consumption per capita in US, in Western Europe, and in Central Eastern Europe, and you don't need to be genius to understand where will be the growth. Of course, time to time, with some like the valuation of this, which happened recently in these areas, put you to another level.
So is the consumption in this region per capita higher or lower than in Western Europe or the US?
Oh, much higher.
Much higher.
Let's say pro capita. Let's say more economy is growing, more healthy economy, more per capita spending is higher, there is also per drugs, and drugs are better and better and better, but also, that's why if in Russia you have today spending after devaluation in last year 120 per capita, but in Czechia 320, and in France 550.
Okay.
That's
so
why
you see lots of potential for growth in this Central Asian region.
Yeah. But of course, what my predecessors say is you need to adopt a lot what multinational are doing. We have this product and we need to sell this worldwide, and this doesn't work. You need to adopt to the local level of development, local portfolio, and you need to be flexible. That's, I think, the medium-sized company, and with some local background and presence in infrastructure, are better citizens, and they can better understand through the local people the needs of the country.
So your manufacturing facility in Kazakhstan, is that for export or is that supplying the local market?
Both. But we took one of the most difficult possibly sector, because we are specialized in sterile products, which are most sensitive and much more complex by the nature than the normal dry forms or no sterile syrups. We are doing sterile antibiotics, sterile infusion, sterile vials and ampoules, and now we start to also preparing for first biosimilars, which is biological product, which we will launch here in this year.
Yeah.
That's why I think this complex project, and especially in the south, is more or less like to make the high-tech in Sicily. It's probably better in Milan
Okay.
or Florence, but the factory, which was with such as already equipment, was there. That's why we get this partnership, and then we turned this to the GMP. It took a couple of years, but let's say 3 years. But now we have all European GMP, and we are producing, and 8 lines are running like in any other, let's say, qualified GMP European countries. GMP is good manufacture practice.
Okay.
Means the rules which are European for everybody who is in Europe.
And what are your company's future plans? Do you have any plans for to further investments or change the way that you do things over the next 5 years?
I think with the talented young people, which is one of surprise for me, that a lot of young Kazakhs go abroad and then they study and they come back. Many Poles go study abroad or other countries, and they try to stay in the easier economical countries where they make the study. And I think with these young, well-educated, talented people, we have a chance to make a serious center hub to not only to the Kazakh country, but also for Iran, Iraq, and another countries which we can, naturally Russia also.
Yeah.
Because in Russia we have tablets and ointments, and in Kazakh we have what we have. That is because of this now Eurozone, we have the chance basically treated this as one country, which gives us enormous flexibility to operate it and optimize the cost, because it's all economy of scale. That we will not repeat it, what we do in Kazakhstan, we will send in Belarus, Armenia, Russia, and vice versa.
So you're using the Eurasian Economic Union
Yeah.
to get economies of scale.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I was so I cannot say that it was more by chance
Right.
that this idea, which was launching President Nazarbayev a couple of years ago, knowing that the country is, let's say, not enough big,
Yeah.
and this became reality, and now the unification of registration and so is in the way, and there's duty already abolished.
Right. Dmitry Pankin from the Eurasian Development Bank, who spoke earlier, was talking about the very high non-tariff barriers within the Eurasian Economic Union. He said they accounted for, it was the same as like a cash tariff of 15 to 25%. I'm guessing that pharmaceuticals is potentially a sector where there could be large non-tariff barriers, maybe different regulations or local content requirement, licensing. Do you find within the Eurasian Economic Union countries non-tariff barriers to be a problem for export?
Well, we have already here one help. Let's say one is this territory. Second is that we participated with the tender for local hospitals, and of course, being local, we have some privilege. And the third, of course, we would like to get more incentive, but we are working in that.
Okay, yeah. Maybe it's part of the future plans.
Now, first of all, you need to show that you can do it.
Right, yeah. Thomas, if we can move on to your experience. So you're the director for both Europe and Central Asia at the IFC. What issues does the IFC come across from its dealings with businesses investing in Kazakhstan?
Okay, very briefly, maybe for those of you who don't know what's IFC, or International Finance Corporation. So we're the largest global development finance institution focusing just on private sector, working in all emerging markets. We're part of the World Bank Group. So the region that I cover gives us roughly about $3 billion annually of new investments that we make in all these countries that you refer to, Europe and Central Asia, which covers really former Yugoslavia and all the way up to here on the east. Yeah. So maybe one word of Kazakhstan's successes, because I think we really want to acknowledge that, and we've been working in Kazakhstan since roughly 1993 as an institution. So clearly it's one of those places where, if one compared 1990s to where we are today, huge growth of incomes, reduction of poverty, really a very different place in terms of macroeconomic management, fiscal management, a very different place to do business than it was so many years ago. Not unlike some of the places that Jerzy was talking about, but quite a dramatic change. Now, opportunity and issues that we encounter, your question, Simon. I think for us, the biggest opportunity that we see in a country like Kazakhstan, and specifically in Kazakhstan, is really about rebalancing the roles of private and public in an economy. And of course, I have my own bias. As I said, we work on private sector finance in all these emerging markets. That's our mandate, our mission. But clearly, Kazakhstan is one of the places, and especially now at times of economic crisis, the decline in commodity prices. There is an opportunity and a great need to diversify the economy, to figure out ways to attract investment to the parts of the economy which had not benefited from that foreign direct investment, as Kazakhstan had. Examples that Jerzy mentioned, there are very few, relatively. So how does one actually change that balance of a very heavy public sector domination to private? There are some great announcements that we heard in the past several months from the government on changing the role of private sector, privatizing companies, introducing a greater private sector participation in infrastructure. So from our perspective as this private sector financier in some of the difficult places, really the opportunity is about how do we support the government in making this happen. And it can happen through providing advice of how to set up privatization tenders. It can come in a way of how do we structure concessions in a way that become bankable and attract financiers, attract equity investors. And it's also about realizing what types of things need to be done to improve the business environment, not just for the largest corporations, the Chevrons of this world, but really mid-sized companies and SMEs, which has often been a challenge, not just here, but in many different places. So there's this one ranking that we often use to compare countries called doing business. It's rife with challenges, of course, and methodology kind of issues, but one good thing that it does is really compares countries across the globe. There's been huge progress, and Kazakhstan is ranked among many other countries around the world. Years that I've been following this country, so roughly about 8 years or so, we've moved up from mid-80s to the 40s, so huge increase. But that means that there are some 40 other places that by this kind of objective measure are considered much more attractive. There's much more that can be done to make the lives of an average company, small or large, easier. So that's another block of opportunities from my perspective.
Right. I mean, thinking about the privatization program is something that you'll have a lot of expertise in. When we look back at the history of privatization in this region, of course, the kind of big regret that economists might have is the advice they gave to Russia post the breakup of the Soviet Union to privatize too quickly, and all it did was create a whole bunch of oligarchs. Now, Kazakhstan is not a huge country, and so it does have a relatively small kind of business scene and a smallish number of large companies and individuals that have a lot of influence. Is there a risk with the privatization program here that we just replace government involvement with oligarchs like we have in Russia, or is there enough external interest to get real competition for these privatizations?
So the way I would answer it is, privatization is not a new concept. It's happened around the world for so many different years, so many years in different types of countries. So, we can always talk about PFI in the UK. We can talk about PPPs in the United States. We can talk about coupon privatization in the Czech Republic, things that happened in Poland in the early 90s with actually case-by-case privatizations that brought a lot of old state-owned companies into private sector, made them efficient. I come out from the bias that private sector, by definition, is much more efficient allocator of goods and services and investments than a public sector. Of course, in many sectors, it's not true, and it requires very heavy regulation. But prima facie, I would say it's really important to change the ownership and control of the assets in order to achieve this most efficient allocation of resources. And even in some cases, the mistakes are made over time. I still believe that a private sector is the right way to go. Now, there are also, of course, a lot of ways and experience of the past 20, 30 years around the world of how one should run a privatization process in order to avoid some of the pitfalls that you're talking about. And that, for me is, how do you prepare an asset for privatization? How do you corporatize a state-owned company? What kind of advisors do you bring in to actually make this happen, from legal, financial, transactional support? I think, and again, it's not a remark about Kazakhstan, but many countries, such as Kazakhstan, the experience and institutional capacity of the governments in dealing with a lot of these issues that had not been dealt with is very little. So how do you actually make sure you get right advice to make the right decisions, and do this in the interest of your own people and your own GDP and your own budgets? There's a body of experience that this country and many others can bring to bear.
Yeah. The role of the state in Kazakhstan is quite large, and so in that sense, I guess so. At the EIU, we are happy to hear about the privatization program as well. We think it's a good thing for the country's long-term growth and the living standards of Kazakhs, but it's not probably going to happen very quickly. Probably the announced plans are more ambitious than what will be achieved. So that's going to necessitate some kind of ordering. What sectors do you think are the priorities? Where is the need for private sector, maybe efficiencies or investment largest? Where should the government move first?
So in that sense, every country is different. Yeah? And then the other point I would make is that privatization, as we call it, does not always mean the sale of assets, because we need to be careful how we define things. It could be private sector participation in infrastructure, which does not necessarily mean the selling of those assets to the private hand. So, when I think about the greatest and the most urgent needs of countries such as Kazakhstan, I would list three things. I would list infrastructure, by whatever means or forms that one can do this in terms of bringing more efficient private sector management and control and oversight of projects and operations of companies. And again, it could be done through sales in some cases, could be done through management contracts, long-term concessions, and so on. Lots of experience around the world. Second area is how to diversify in economy, which is very commodity orientated, especially hydrocarbons, but not only. How do you actually find some of the leading companies? Again, we had an example of pharmaceuticals or telecom a minute ago. And I think, those types of opportunities exist there just because of the maybe lesser competition, weaker level of development to start with. How does one actually find those gaps and opportunities by privatization or bringing foreign direct investment? And third one, finally, you cannot have a long-term financially sustainable economy, long-term meaning 15, 20 years, unless you have an efficient financial sector. So, more competition, more private ownership of financial sector. I know it's not going to happen overnight, but it's really important in order to channel the funding to the private sector and other participants in the economy, those three.
Right, okay.
My question is about your vision of Kazakhstan. It's a huge country based near Russia, China. How do you see the development of telecommunication? Kazakhstan is a connector. It can connect all surrounding countries. It's Asia in the middle, it's China, Great China. It's totally the great vision of Silk Road. What's your vision? How long it takes for Kazakhstan to develop the infrastructure to be well connected with the surrounding countries? Thank you.
So, Andrew, maybe if you want to start with that, how well connected in a telco perspective is Kazakhstan with its neighbors?
I think maybe a slightly different angle. In telecoms, each network that operates, actually, let's take an example of Kazakhstan. I think it's in the top 5 countries in the world in terms of number of SIM cards per individual. So everybody has access. And integrating our mobile network with either Chinese or Russian is not something that will add value. But what we need to think about is the digital future, is which applications will be sitting on our platform. If we take telecom networks or those towers that exist that help us enable our mobile phones, we are offering a digital platform for services that then are delivered to the subscribers. So in the platform economy mindset, I think the integration has to do more with which apps are developed that connect Kazakhstan, Russia, Kazakhstan, China. And going back to an earlier point, last year actually was here in a different capacity speaking on a Silk Road panel, and my main message was Kazakhstan needs to figure out how to not be a transit route, how to not simply be in between big markets and between Europe and China where things transit through. Where does Kazakhstan add value? Value-adding services is the answer to that question. What comes along the route that contributes to that trade? What is a specific value proposition in Kazakhstan that's unique and differentiated? Those are big dilemmas, but simply saying more investment along the Silk Route somehow is an answer. It needs to be more smart investment, more investment where Kazakhstan has a direct stake and has a seat at the table as those ideas are developed and it's developed in Kazakhstan's favor. If I could maybe for a second diverge and pick up on
Sure, yep.
Thomas's point on SMEs. I think it's critical. A backbone of any successful economy is small, medium enterprises. And I wanted to quote to you a BCG study that looked at mobile technologies and called it a growth engine. And they compared markets, both emerging economies, OECD markets, and they said that the difference between SMEs that digitize, that adopt mobile connectivity, and other SMEs, the growth rate 8 times different. Any company today that's not digital, that's offering any kind of service, if tomorrow they adopt this technology, they have a prospect of going 8 times as fast. And our own company's #1 corporate responsibility program has to do with digital entrepreneurs, has to do with enabling startups, creating those digital products in every market where we operate. So for us, the SME angle is key. But sorry, I've mixed two topics.
That's fine. I have something I'd like to get the panel's thoughts on, but before I do, just checking that I'm not taking your question away from the audience.
IFC has invested in a lot of companies around the region. What was the investment that most surprised you? In other words, something that let's say the institution was not particularly keen on, and you went ahead and did it, and then you were really surprised at how well it did.
Great question. Yeah.
Should I try to answer? You know, I can try. You know, I think it's if you permit me, rather than picking something in Central Asia, I'll pick something which is a little bit further west. But it's a great story, and it's a privatization context. So there's this bank in Romania, of all places, where IFC, together with our friends at EBRD, made an investment before really the boom of the bank acquisitions in the mid kind of 2000s, and it's was a bank called BCR. So IFC and EBRD jointly bought however many, 12% or so, 12 each. And within 2 years, after significant corporate governance improvements, institutional building plans, the market began to change. And the level of interest of international institutions in the region really skyrocketed. So from an investment of, for us about $100 million, it became $1 billion. Billion for us, billion for EBRD. And what surprised me to your question is really, the speed, of course, because it doesn't happen. I mean, it's not Yahoo, it's not Yandex in this region, or any of the kind of IT type of companies. It's a bank, brick and mortar. But it also showed the power of changes in quality of the institution, the quality of management, quality of corporate governance, and maybe it doesn't always happen 10 times within 2 or 3 years, but we've seen time and time again that there is a way to make your corporate, make your institution appear attractive and become more efficient all at the same time before you go to market. Maybe I'll give one more example, also a bank, Georgia, much closer this way. So a bank called, TBC, some of you may have ran into it over time. Again, a group of entrepreneurs started a brand new bank in the early 1990s with about $500. Today, the bank's market cap in London is in the hundreds of millions of dollars, really over a 20-year period of consistent management, strong corporate governance, despite some geopolitical challenges that they've gone through, it can be done. So I guess the messages of those two examples is that, it's IFC or anybody else, you can be part of a story that by doing some things right, you can increase your investment, increase your efficiency, increase the wealth of the people. So those are the good stories.
Next question from the audience. We've got to pause. I'm interested to ask the panel about competition policy. So this is a critical part of having a vibrant sort of private sector economy, especially in many of the economies that have sort of come out of the state-directed transition in Eastern and Central Europe. It's still an area where there's a lot of needs for improvement. Does the panel think that competition policy in Kazakhstan is on the right track?
Who, me?
Yeah, would you want to start, Jerzy?
Oh, sorry. I was thinking about Unicredit Bank. Can you repeat the question?
Do you have any thoughts on competition policy?
Competition? I would say that, no, we have quite simple rules. Today, basically the market is very fragmented. I think we have 4.4. We are now number 1 in this market. below all the other players. That's why the question of competition is depending of the prices and efficiency of marketing.
Yeah.
Once is story in the prices for tenders and for over the counter, you need to make the good advertising.
Okay, yeah. I mean, Andrew, I guess telecoms, it's a lot more subject to regulation, perhaps in that sense, and there's big barriers to entry in terms of the infrastructure. What's the regulatory environment like in Kazakhstan compared to some of the other markets you operate in?
I think on your question in regulation competition, I think those are intertwined. And now that Kazakhstan has entered WTO, there is even a renewed kind of mechanism pressure to keep driving towards stronger competitiveness. I can give you a real example, our own experience here in Kazakhstan, where a license, 4G license was granted to one company ahead of others. And then the state has corrected this policy. You know, it's in the country's interest, in the interest of the subscribers. In a very short few months, we now have this license, and we're as confident as we are in any market that we will deliver those services. We might even speed ahead of a company that started slightly earlier. And governments and regulators have their reasons. You know, in some respect, in Kazakhstan, we're experiencing this race to the bottom in terms of prices for telecom services. You know, prices are going up for everything except that connectivity prices are going down. But you also asked about specificity of Kazakhstan earlier in this conversation, and Kazakhstan is the least densely populated country, one of the least densely populated in the world, with all the territory and the small population. And then you look at the Netherlands, most densely populated in Europe. So imagine the amount of infrastructure you need, how much investment you need to put in to ensure connectivity everywhere around this big landmass, and then how you monetize this. And then look at the Netherlands. You know, your one tower reaches probably 100 times more customers than it does in rural Kazakhstan. So regulators' role is to assure sustainability of businesses. They do not want to drive us into the ground, but also assure best value to the consumer and finding that balance. On a different angle on competition is this new space that's, you know, people are interested in talking about. It's sexy. It's fintech. You know, what is fintech? For us, it's a question of competition, question of regulation. The regulation around banking services, around financial transactions, have been drafted in the world where banks were providing financial services. That was it. Today, you have mobile money. You have your account on your mobile phone could become your checking account in a way. And those services are tried in areas where when we have cash economies. And we see a lot of future in Kazakhstan, and we want the regulators to start seeing that kind of technological advancement and new capabilities that exist, and start thinking outside the box and stimulate competition in financial services beyond simply banks. So that's, for us, would be an interesting area to explore.
Yeah. Okay, we are in our last sort of 2 minutes for the session. So a chance for one last question, if there is one. Yeah, over here at this table.
My name is Bojan. Thank you for this opportunity. I have a question to Mr. Starak. Actually, it's maybe two questions. First of all, you've made some considerable investment in Kazakhstan, and it was a good business case and good story for us as a country. At the same time, I want to ask you, if you could return back, what would you change while you're making your investment, or you would leave it as it is? And the second question is, please name one thing that you like about Kazakhstan and one thing that you don't like about Kazakhstan.
Controversial.
Well, there was when we start to look at it for the market, there was really very little, let's say, foreign competitors, and there was few very small local industry companies. That's why if I will know today what I will do, at that time I will buy them possibly all, if it's possible, or make the partnership and joint venture. That's why I was sleeping too much, and then the other colleagues from pharma industry follow, and today they created more competition in the market. And what I don't like is when I'm arriving to Shymkent, where we have a plant that really it's hot.
It's too hot.
It's too hot. But seriously, I think it's a very positive atmosphere. Really, you feel that you are not alone. Administration is very friendly. They like investors. They are friendly people. They are the people which want to learn. If you show them that you can teach and you treat them seriously, they are very pleased. And this, from that point of view, is very pleasant. And I think I have the pleasure being probably one of the few from, let's say, medium-small companies in the board of foreign investors, which is a fantastic way of communicating through the president. But around the president, you have a lot of administration. That means the government is there. And during these meetings, you can create it also some bilateral meetings, time to time, even with some president, and express eventually your worries or wishes. And this somehow psychologically secure you to that your reinforce your level of safety of your investment.
Okay, and an optimistic note to finish on. Thanks very much to my panel, Andrew Chokoen from VimpelCom, Jersey Stark from Paul Farmer, and Thomas Telmer from the IFC. Thanks very much for your contributions. Yeah. We now just have two more sessions to go until the close of the summit, and our final discussion is with Gligor Tashkevich, who's a former Minister for Foreign Investment in Macedonia, who's going to be sharing some of his experiences in attracting foreign investment into that economy, and he's also now an associate with Alpha Source Capital, a hedge fund based in New York. Please welcome Gligor to the stage. Thanks for joining us, Gligor.
Thanks, Simon. Honored to be here. I'm really happy. Thanks for hanging in, everybody. I am the penultimate speaker.
So when you were the Minister for Foreign Investment in Macedonia, under your tenure, the country achieved about $1.5 billion of foreign investment into what is a very small market and one that's probably not that well known to many foreign investors. So that must have been quite a complicated or difficult thing to achieve. Can you maybe tell us something about your experiences in doing that in Macedonia?
Sure. Let me give the audience a little bit of background about myself, just so you have context. I've worked in, lived in, traveled to or through 103 countries and territories around the world. I've been in places like North Korea, Antarctica. I've climbed Kilimanjaro. I've been sort of all over. And as Minister for Foreign Investment of the Republic of Macedonia, I traveled to 40 countries, some of them as many as 10 times apiece. The Prime Minister was elected on his promises of attracting foreign direct investment, but without any understanding of how long it actually takes to do this. Because in a parliamentary democracy, most governments have a term of 4, sometimes 5 years, but that's actually the minimum lifespan it takes to attract FDI in most cases. It's 4 to 6 years. We're talking about manufacturing plants, assembly line operations, stuff of this nature. So I was trying to help him pick smaller targets which we could see some successes, some small successes, so that he could say he kept his promises while working sort of, they were like staged, small, medium, and long term. And my last project, the attraction of the Marriott Hotel in Macedonia, opened last week, in fact.
Okay.
Of course, I left office in 08. It took almost 8 years, but we signed all the paperwork, and it took them that long to find a place and to renovate it. But anyway, as an example of the time horizon. One thing that Kazakhstan can do here, which has a very short time horizon and involves a large number of people, albeit for a short period of time, is to attract the film industry here. Now, when most people talk about the film industry, they're talking about homegrown people becoming directors and making their own films. I'm talking about attracting the film crews from overseas to come and film their films here. And you can do that in very short order and hire hundreds, if not thousands, of extras and people to do that. And that could be a great way of sort of keeping your promise to the people.
Mm-hmm. And was that something that, that you found success with in Macedonia?
Well, the Prime Minister didn't like it, so I wasn't actually able to do it, but I had put together a big plan on how we could leverage this and bring in all these people and build Macedonia's reputation and so on, but he didn't go for it. He had me concentrate on 10 sectors, which sounds like a lot, but then I was also working investment banking hours, about 90 hours a week, so there was time for everything. Our key focus is automotive. The audience may not be aware that the automotive industry actually has 4 major tiers. So a small undeveloped country like Macedonia can assemble tier 4 parts, which fit into tier 3 parts, which fit into tier 2 parts, tier 1, and then the shell of the car. So our principal underlying focus is to attract the tier 4 part manufacturers to Macedonia because they were getting tired of being in Slovakia, because Slovakia had since joined the EU, prices had gone up, and they needed to find another place to move. So that was sort of the longer term view there. But I also had oversight for computer, hardware manufacturing, software programming, call centers, things like business outsourcing activities, agriculture, everything on the supply chain, including cold storage units or supermarkets, mining. Macedonia, like Kazakhstan, also has a periodic table of mining potential. Pharmaceuticals, leather and woodworking, aviation. I brought in several airlines, hotels, banking, alternative energy, and that's 10. But it kept me very busy, and my team too.
And based upon your experiences there, I mean, if you were talking to the FDI minister of Kazakhstan, what would your 2 pieces of advice be, or your 2 lessons?
So I'll answer that question with an anecdote.
Okay.
The day before I attended my parliamentary confirmation hearings, I had a visit from a burly man who said he was head of the state electricity production unit called LM. Now, Macedonia had decentralized electricity. We had production and transmission and state control, and we had spun off distribution to the home, to the local arm, to EVN, Uvena of Austria. And he said to me, you can't attract foreign direct investment if we can't keep the lights on. And shortly thereafter, after being confirmed and being in office for about 6 weeks or so, I had a visit from the chief senior advisor of a mechanical civil engineering company which had 22 operations across the countryside. And he said, Mr. Minister, I've come to you because you are the only person I think can solve this problem. And I said, well, what is it? He said, well, they're fighting in one of our plants. I said, well, why do you think I can solve this problem? He said, because you're the only minister who doesn't belong to a political party. I was a technocratic minister. And what was happening was, after these elections, the workers representing the two major parties, were actually fighting during work time and neglecting their task, which was to build the high voltage power structures that held the high voltage line, which the country desperately needed to keep our lights on. So when I went over there, spent probably 2-3 hours negotiating with both sides, I said, when you go home at night, you turn the lights on and you assume they're going to turn on. But what would happen if you go home at night and they don't go on? And you realize that because you were fighting all day, it was your fault. You wouldn't have many friends left. So when I sort of gave them this idea that they had a patriotic responsibility to get back to work, it somehow worked, I have to say. I was a little surprised, but it all worked as planned.
Okay, patriotic duty.
Yeah, so you can't bring in FDI unless you have generation distribution electricity to support these operations. That's number one. And to that end, here in Kazakhstan, the World Bank financed a very critical north-south high voltage line connecting the north with 3 million people in the south. It opened 4 years ago this month. I'm sure there's more to do. The second area would be you can't bring in FDI unless you have trained the people to meet the needs of the companies who are coming. My understanding is that there are plenty of oil and gas, finance, and legal talent here, but there are a few other types of industry specialists like information technology or even entrepreneurs.
Mm-hmm. What would you say have been Kazakhstan's most useful reforms to date? I mean, it has already attracted quite a bit of FDI. I mean, most of it in the minerals and mining sector. Of course, there's a desire to diversify that, but it's certainly been a relative success story. Why do you think that has been?
Well, I took a slightly different angle on the question. I feel that in the longer term, or the medium term, it's going to be the changes and its approach to education and science and technology that will drive the future development of the country, right. As opposed to, well, I mean, diversification is good and necessary, but it's going to be, on a much higher level, educating people to do a variety of things is going to carry the day. Yeah. So, for example, you moderated the panel earlier with the education minister. You probably know more about this than I do, but he's very forward-thinking. He had this a free mandatory education from grade 9 to grade 12, which he's implementing, making English a mandatory third language in the country. It's another idea I believe is credited to him. And then a year ago in May, President Nazarbayev issued 100 concrete steps, a modern state for all. And there are 3 elements in there which I think are relevant to this answer. Number 79 talks about a gradual transition to English-only instruction. Number 63 calls for the creation of scientific centers and laboratories to conduct joint scientific and research projects. And number 64 calls for grants for industry innovation to be financed. So I think that these things are all sort of medium to long term, but that they will catapult or propel Kazakhstan's development.
Very impressed that you got to number 79 in the...
it was very small print, thank you.
So Kazakhstan has a range of partners and competitors, if we think about sort of, other countries around the world in some of its key sectors. Who do you think are the most sort of strategic players for the country to be aware of, either in terms of countries to partner with, countries to learn from, countries to watch out for?
I'm reminded in your question of the situation in Macedonia back in the early 90s, shortly after independence. The late President Gligorov, the first president of the Republic of Macedonia, had an arm's length policy with all our neighbors, with Greece, with Bulgaria, with Serbia, with Albania. And it's widely believed this is why we were able to ensure the territorial integrity of the country, because each of our 4 neighbors had reasons to not want us to be there. In the case of Kazakhstan, we can say that they have to, have arm's length relationships with Russia and China, as we've heard today from other people. You might invoke President Reagan's, from America, President Reagan's expression, which came about from the Reykjavik summit with Boris Yeltsin from Russia, trust but verify, right? Where you engage, but you engage with caution, you engage carefully. hopefully to your mutual benefit, but you don't sort of go into bed.
I mean, Kazakhstan is quite incredible, really, in terms of its foreign relations, because it genuinely does manage to have good relations with the West, good relations with Russia, good relations with China, and also with the Arab world, including both the kind of Saudi side and the Iranian side.
We even had the Lebanese ambassador here today. That was a good sign, right? So I would say, back to your question, it really helps to have a strategic relationship with America in terms of entrepreneurship and training and things of this nature. And then I don't really, I mean, that's my bias, obviously. I confess to have the bias, but America does have a large number of programs and foundations and institutions that promote entrepreneurship, and we do export those all around the world.
Yeah. Do you see any development models that are particularly relevant for Kazakhstan? There are a lot of resource-based economies looking to diversify and transition at the moment, encourage entrepreneurship, encourage FDI. Do you think Kazakhstan maybe is a model for some other countries?
I think that's a fair question. In Kazakhstan, perhaps that's actually a fair point. Kazakhstan could well be a model for other countries in respect for how the president has sort of slowly developed, but with very consistent results, developed the country. And we see this, for example, in the World Bank's Doing Business report, where the country's results have increased every year successively. So small steps, steady steps, but always with the end goal in mind. I'm trying to think, I mean, look, you have the resource-based issue, but an equally important issue is its landlocked nature, right? And its massive size. And there are few countries in the world that have both, right? Macedonia is landlocked, but it's minuscule. Switzerland is landlocked, but it's very small also. So, so how do you, I don't think you can square that so easily. Do you have any thoughts on that yourself?
I think Kazakhstan does have a few sort of unique challenges, and one of them is the geography, as you mentioned. So the kind of model that, say, Dubai has gone down is going to be a lot more challenging here, just because the physical connectivity is not quite there.
I mean, one of the things I wanted to mention in my remarks was the fact that they've recently established this China to Black Sea Railroad, and beginning on June 1st, they've agreed to a common tariff. And that's huge in terms of making the train competitive to the cost of shipping items from China into Europe. And I think that this could really be a model for helping the country develop and really to own the idea of being a transit hub. I think maybe it's not so accepting of being a transit hub. It feels a bit lost surrounded by its larger neighbors. And if it just said, we own this, we are a transit hub, and we're going to have railroads, and we're going to expand Air Astana, we're going to bring in other airlines, we're going to provide competition, I think that could go farther.
Yeah. Something we haven't spoken about today that I think you might have some thoughts on is the social factors that are needed for economic transitions. You gave the interesting story of the factory before, and how it's, I guess, unfortunately for an economist like me, it's not just data and economic policies that determine what happens. What kind of social cohesions and social factors do you think are important for economic development?
Well, just for background for the audience to explain, I have an MBA degree from Cornell's Johnson Graduate School of Management, but most people who go out get MBA degrees get it in finance or accounting or something like this. I have it in the field of organizational behavior, which in more modern day times is now called management leadership systems. So I actually care a lot about how people interact in a business environment, and I think it's informed a lot of what I've done. Just by a show of hands, how many people have been to Albania before? Albania?
Anyone been to Albania?
No, nobody. All right. Well, let me explain. Albania, which is on the edge of Europe, on the Adriatic Sea, southwest Europe almost, or the Western Balkans, as they say, has a very different definition of friendship. When an Albanian says they're your friend, they mean it. They're ready to lay down across a road for a speeding car to save your life. It is such a selfless definition of friendship. Possibly coming from the, sort of the tribal nature of the country, where there's basically a larger tribe in the north and a larger tribe in the south. But this when an Albanian says they're your friend, it is such an important statement. It's not made lightly. And so, as someone, I've been to Albania 10 times, I'm aware that once you achieve that degree of relationship with an Albanian, you'll get things done a lot quicker. The trust is there, right? And so maybe we could take your question and say, well, okay, if it's trust, how do you build trust with local partners? And you might do that through entertainment or eating or shared interests, right? But to use an example that just hit the social media streams earlier this week, there's a TV show, a talk show in America called Ellen, after Ellen DeGeneres, a very famous lesbian talk show host. And Emirates Airlines from United Arab Emirates has just started flying from Los Angeles to Dubai nonstop, one of the world's longest nonstop flights. And to promote this new route, they arranged for everyone in the audience to get a free trip to Dubai. Now, of course, the show was filmed weeks in advance, but when the show actually was aired, one of my friends who was in the audience posted on Facebook that she won a free trip to Dubai, and she was very excited. She had never been on a plane before, so she was going to Dubai. But you can bet, in terms of building trust with local partners, coming back to that theme, that the audience will never forget either the show or their trip for the rest of their lives. So that's on a very grand scale, obviously, but as one concept. But then I want to come back to the 100 Steps document. It actually contained 6 directives for improving the identity and unity of the nation, which in turn will have, we hope, a direct impact on the future growth of the economy. And so I'll mention 3 of them. A development of patriotism through the Manjilik L, or Eternal Nation Project. Implementation of the Big Country, Big Family Project, which will strengthen Kazakhstan's identity and create conditions to form one civil society. And within that, the country's identified 6 regional tourism clusters to further develop tourism. And the last is the development of civil identity through the Menin Elim, or My Country Project, which aims to accomplish its ambitious goal by implementing technological projects on a large scale, such as an internet portal called the Encyclopedia of Kazakhstan. Mm-hmm. So the 100 Steps, the President understands that these 100 Steps do have to have this cultural, societal factor, this cohesion, to make the country move forward.
And so you have your history working in government, but your current role is, or one of your current roles is working for a hedge fund in New York. What's the perception of Kazakhstan or the Central Asian region in the financial sector in the US?
Well, just to clarify, so I work for one of the only female-owned broker-dealers in New York, and we represent several hedge funds. And actually, one of my hedge funds has an investment here in Kazakhstan, actually, in the oil and gas sector. Mm-hmm. But I haven't actually spoken to them about the investment, other than knowing that they were here a few years ago to make a purchase. I can't really answer that. I'm sorry.
Okay. So we have a couple of minutes left before the final keynote with Professor Jeffrey Sachs. But before we move on to the final session, are there any questions anybody would like to ask Ligor? Yeah, one down the front here. Are the microphones still around? Oh, it's one coming, yeah.
Thank you very much, Alex Nice from the Economist Intelligence Unit. You mentioned that your role started with a political pledge from the Prime Minister to boost FDI, and I wonder whether you found, in terms of the expectations from the Prime Minister, that when politicians think about FDI, they often think in terms of very glamorous, perhaps very high-tech, high innovation investments, which perhaps are not necessarily the right things to target, depending on the the level of development and the stage of investment. Is that a problem that you encountered, something that you had to negotiate when you were deciding the kind of areas in which you wanted to target foreign investment for the
Great question. I think the problem wasn't really a mistargeting of sectors as much as it was managing expectations of the people and the government, the Prime Minister himself, who had no idea how long it takes to make these decisions. We had, so people were promised jobs, right? And they figure, well, elect this guy, I'll get a job. But then you're waiting 1 year or 2 years and you get discontented, right? So you have to manage those appropriately.
I mean, that time horizon is quite interesting. I mean, you talked about how it sort of took, was sort of, 5 or 10 years after you left your role that you started to see some of the real returns on some of the work that you'd done.
Right. In one case, we opened up 2 mines and hired 1,000 people within 2 years. That was a huge thing. These mines had been shut down by mismanagement and corruption, basically. And it was in the eastern part, northeast part of the country, which is very rural. In fact, it took me, you can drive from north to south of Macedonia in 3 hours. But to go from Skopje, which is the north central part of the country, and to visit these 2 mines in the eastern part, it takes 8 hours to go round trip. They're so remote, and the mountain roads are so treacherous that this was really a region comparable to West Virginia in America, just sort of coal mining country or something.
You gave us the example before of the sort of sector you were thinking of targeting, the film industry, but that didn't get the political support from the Prime Minister, perhaps speaking to Alex's point. Was that because it wasn't glamorous enough, or?
I don't know. You'd think everyone wants to be in a movie, right? I mean, how cool would that be? In fact, I had 2 people who came through Skopje whose movies I'm in, and I'm now in the IMDb Internet Movie Database for it. But yeah, I really don't know why he didn't like the idea. He never really explained it to me. What would happen is every 6 months, he'd call me into his office, and he'd say, Gligor, here's a piece of paper. It's all handwritten. I have it, at home in my filing cabinet for posterity. And he'd list the months, January through June or July through December, and he'd list the names of the countries he wanted me to visit. But he was a bit geographically challenged because one meeting we had, he listed Dubai in March, and he listed Abu Dhabi in May, not realizing they were next to each other.
Any other questions from the audience? We're in our last 2 minutes now. No. In that case, thanks very much for sharing your insights with us, Gligor. Please join me in thanking him.